Welcome to the User Defenders Podcast, where we interview successful UX designers who fight for the user in order to inspire and equip you to do the same. And now, here's your host, Jason Ogle.
Greetings, User Defenders. Welcome to Episode 2. I'm your host, Jason Ogle, and today I'm thrilled to bring you another inspiring interview, this time with UX design consultant Craig Morrison. Craig is a really smart and funny guy, as you'll discover in this episode. He does a little comedy on the side and has broken some really interesting records. The show notes will give you a link to that. But just enjoyed our conversation and especially our talk about validating your idea before building it. Hope you enjoy this interview with Craig Morrison. Craig Morrison is an extremely curious and generous UX design consultant focusing in the area of startups. He's an active blogger who's authored some very popular UX articles, including Why You Shouldn't Hire a UI UX Designer and my personal fave, How to Land a Job in UX with No Experience. He's also quite the comedian and has a video channel where he and a buddy set some really peculiar records. Hey, Craig, welcome. I'm super excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I see you've done your homework, indeed.
Didn't expect that last little bit, did you?
No, I didn't. That just came out of nowhere.
But you know what? Part of what I want to do here is, and part of my passion behind this show is, really getting to know you. It's, you're doing some great work in UX, and we're definitely going to get into that. But I feel like, I think the best way to connect with people is to really tell stories. And I'm sure you have some really great stories to tell. And I think that starts with, who you are as a person and kind of how you got where you are. So that's sort of the little intro here. And it's kind of the superhero secret identity startup here. That's how we start the show. Yes. So I want to talk about yours. I'd like to take a minute and you give us a look into your personal life.
Sure. So I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, way up here in the north. I live with my girlfriend, and a little bit about me, I guess. So I started into the digital world many, many years ago when I was probably, 16 years old, 15, 16. And it could have even been before that. I'm not too sure, but I decided I wanted to start a GeoCities website to post pictures of me and my friends snowboarding. That was my big thing. And it was so long ago that I was getting the pictures, getting the pictures printed and then scanning them up into my computer and then posting them on GeoCities.
Old school.
So, old school stuff indeed. And so, it was probably the worst website that's ever been created in the world. But that kind of got my sort of passion for design happening.
Yes.
This is kind of where I got into Photoshop and kind of editing the photos and also editing a little bit of, quote unquote branding for the website. And then from there, I kind of just grew. A close friend of mine actually started selling websites to clients around when we were about 17 or 18. And he would come to me and say, okay, well, I sold those websites. So, now let's build it. So that kind of got me into front end development a bunch more. And then from there, I sort of just followed that path, continued building websites for clients of my own. I sort of got into the advertising world a little bit. I also have a background in video production and motion graphics animation. So I did that for a while. And then that kind of brought me around to startups and user interface and user experience design. And that's kind of a brief overview of my path.
Nice. Now, I think we need GeoCities again.
I agree. This Squarespace stuff is just not doing it for me.
I know. Everything's starting to look the same. Let's, even if it looks bad, at least it'll look different, right?
Exactly. At least it's teaching somebody, you got to work for that website, not just
That's
throw up a
right.
theme.
You got to work for it. That's true. And a minimum of at least 4 animated GIFs.
Yes.
Right? So I love it, man. That sounds real familiar. I definitely identify with your startup story there, your starting out story.
Yeah.
So you told us that part. What inspired you to pursue UX design as a career? What really got into your soul that made you really want to do this?
Well, I guess it got to the point where, so I'm very kind of entrepreneurial focused. And I got to the point where I'm sort of building websites and I'm always kind of building small side projects ever since, I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I started wondering, how do I make these better from, how do I make people want to use these more? So if anyone's familiar with starting your own side project, a lot of the time, 9 times out of 10, you create something and you're all passionate about it and you release it to the world and nobody cares, nobody uses it, and then you are depressed for 3 months. So that feeling of failure kind of brought me to this point where it made me think, like, why don't people want to use this? And what are the steps I can take to really kind of get inside people's minds and find out what they want and kind of give it to them, as opposed to just, coming up with ideas off the top of my head. So that got me into sort of UX. And then once I started learning about, wow, this makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense than the way I'm seeing most people, design websites, even in the advertising world. No one is focused on the user. They're, especially in advertising, it's all about, client and then the agency, and they kind of build this website and kind of no one's asking, well, who's using this?
Right.
So.
Absolutely. And it's frustrating to spend so much sweat equity and blood, sweat, and tears to build something and create something, and to discover that no one's really using it or caring about it.
Exactly.
Because they can't
exactly.
use
it. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you know what else too is, another little thing I want to pull out from what you said is just about the curiosity factor. I think, curiosity, passion, and empathy are the 3 requirements for great UX designers. So,
yeah.
I
couldn't agree more.
Sorry. If you weren't doing this for a living, what would be your second career choice and why?
100% comedy writing. It's a very distant, a very far jump from one to the other. But comedy writing was kind of my passion growing up. I did it. So you kind of mentioned in the intro, which I'm sure we'll get into more later. But, I've done a lot of, I kind of produced a couple of web series that were sort of sketch-based comedy. I wrote for Second City here in Toronto and produced a couple of live shows. I also acted in a few live shows. And cool. That, I really enjoyed making people laugh. That kind of puts me on the spot to be funny, which is hard, but that would definitely be my second choice. And it's kind of something that I did try to, I took a stab at, but I just wasn't comfortable in that world of, you either are going to succeed or you're going to fail miserably for your entire life.
Right. Who's been the biggest inspiration in your work and why?
In terms of UX stuff?
Yeah, in terms of UX.
Inspiration wise, well, I'll tell you, when I read, so I started reading books. I was already into UX and I was kind of, doing the whole thing. And then I started reading more books on sort of the strategy behind sort of the overall concept of building a product, which kind of in my mind really is what UX is all about. So when I read books like The Lean Startup, kind of, and then Lean UX for startups, these kind of books really they caused this big shift in my mentality where I was like, whoa, this is kind of more about the bigger picture. And in UX, some people think of UX as, wireframes and wireframes and UI and just a relationship between the person who's building this and the user. But these books kind of opened my mind to the fact that it's about the whole thing. So in my opinion, and I've written about this before, the UX person, in your company is literally the most important person there.
Yeah.
If you have them in charge of sort of an overall, making sure the experience is consistent from top to bottom, from start to finish. So in terms of like specific people, I'm not sure if I can really like name one individual person, but I would say books on the lean sort of movement are kind of really what have influenced me the most.
Nice. I just started reading Lean UX and pulled something out that really, it's a great. I'm not too far into it, but I have high expectations. But I tweeted something yesterday that got a little traction. It's just right out of the book where he says, and I think it's one of the motivators behind the movement is because the biggest lie in software is phase 2. So that's so true, right? I mean, and how often have you designed something and had a vision for your design and it's like, well, we'll get to that phase 2, and how often does it ever happen? Not often, right?
Yeah. Never.
So I love that you said that.
Yeah.
What's one habit that you believe contributes to your success, Craig?
Just let me think here. Habit. I'm actually just reading the book, The Habit Loop, so it's kind of a topical question.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the habit wise, I would say not taking things personally. It's not really a habit, but sort of not taking things personally and not getting too discouraged. So I guess the habit for me would be just showing up and doing what you're there to do every day. It sounds, I don't mean to get too unemotional or uninspiring, but
no, it's fine.
I see a lot of people that I talk to get caught up in motivation, and they get caught up in, oh, I feel really motivated to do this today and I'm going to rush out and, do this, but that's kind of a fleeting feeling. Mm-hmm. So what I try to sort of tell myself is, do the thing you're here to do every day. It doesn't matter if you get a whole bunch accomplished today. It doesn't matter if, you change the world, as long as you're there to put in what you want to put in towards that single goal, then you're making progress.
Oh, I love that. Stay consistent.
Yes.
Right? That's key. Just stay consistent. Whether somebody's looking at what you're doing, whether somebody's using what you're doing, whether somebody cares or not, stay consistent. Stay passionate.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get too caught up in your emotions, because you're going to be up and down all the time. Mm. But if you can sort of push through those and see what the goal is and just accomplish a little bit, then you're good.
That's awesome. Can you tell us about the one thing you're working on that you're most excited about?
Yeah, so I just kind of launched a new product 2 weeks ago. So we're kind of in like a beta phase right now. But early on when I started blogging, so I'm not really a big social guy, right? I didn't know that much about social media. But I knew, Twitter especially is kind of more geared towards business, and you get a lot more traction for business articles and especially UX stuff than you would on, like, say, a Facebook page or something like that. So I started looking into tactics for getting more of a Twitter presence. Okay, so I was like, how do I increase followers, and how do I get more people to be listening to what I'm saying and want to click on the things that I click on? And so I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and I was listening to Michael O'Neill, who has a podcast called The Solopreneur Hour.
Oh, heard of him.
I don't know if you've ever heard this guy, but he's got a good podcast where he kind of interviews entrepreneurs in more of like a chit chat scenario.
Yeah.
So they just kind of, it's more of like a talk show than it is, more of a business podcast. Anyway, long story short, he was kind of talking the one day about Buffer, which is kind of this social media scheduling program, and that they had these suggestions for sort of suggested tweets. And so he was saying what he does is he goes on and he grabs these suggested tweets and he cues them into his Twitter feed, and then he hashtags them with popular hashtags. And he was saying, oh, he's getting a lot of traction doing this. So I started doing that, and it was working really well. So then Buffer canceled their suggested tweet feature.
That's right.
So I was like, oh no, like this has been working so well. I've been seeing such consistent sort of Twitter growth. I was super bummed out. And they kind of released this blog post with all these people commenting, like over 150 comments, just furious with the fact that they're removing this feature. So I said, all right, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. So I me and a good friend of mine put together a very sort of minimal viable product of suggested social content to share. So now basically you sign up, you log in, and you get 25 sort of suggested pieces of social content to share in the categories of, very close to Buffer suggestions, which were sort of entrepreneurship, like a life hacking, productivity, marketing, and a couple other ones. And these are kind of all articles that have been proven to show kind of retweets and get a lot of attention. So most of the ones on there have over 1,000 social shares already. Wow. So just launched that, and pretty excited about the potential that is going to have, because I just posted a comment on Buffer's blog, and I got over 100 kind of signups waiting for the product to launch.
Nice.
So that kind of gave me,
validation.
A lot of optimism. Yeah, a little bit of validation, which is always super important. Absolutely. And that kind of gave me the validation I needed to sort of move forward. And I was like, okay, let's just build something really, really minimal. So, when you log in, literally, you just see a list of these suggested tweets with hashtags and a little button that you can either tweet it or kind of add it straight to Buffer. Nice. But that's my most recent project that I'm excited about.
Sweet. So Lean UX, Defenders, you heard that. We've mentioned it a couple times. Definitely look into Lean UX. Grab hold of that book and dig into it. The MVP. We are scientists. Yes. I interviewed Josh Tucker last week. He's a prototyper, really cool, smart guy. And we talked about we talked about the MVP and the importance of experimenting, because we are all scientists in a way, and I put out there, we're mad scientists. And then he's like, well, I'm only mad when I don't get my work validated. And I said, okay, well, we're glad scientists. So anyway, that's neat. I'm glad you said that. So let's move into, first of all, before we move into the next segment, is there a place where folks can go and get into that and sign up for what you're doing there that you just mentioned?
Yeah. You can visit, the URL is getquilia. So I'm going to spell it because it's a little bit hard. Sure. So it's get, and then KWILIA, and nice. Getquilia.com. So the Quilia, just really quickly, is the largest flock of birds. So it's a South African bird that it's not spelled that way, but it's pronounced that way. And so I went with that, thinking of the idea of, large groupings of tweets.
Clever. Right on. Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's really clever. Let's get into your transformation. Every superhero goes through some sort of transformation where they realize the powers that they have and they harness them for the greater good. So let's get into what's your design superpower, Craig?
My design superpower. Yes. I love this. I love this theme of superheroes.
Nice.
It's fantastic.
Thank you.
So I would say my design superpower is the ability to, my ability to design a mock-up in Photoshop and then turn it and then code the front end of it like to a T, like pixel perfect.
Love it.
So throughout my career, sometimes being a designer, like you get so frustrated when you pass off a mock-up to some developers and then they're like, okay, it's done. And you look at it and you're like, what? This is this isn't even close. I'm okay. I'm okay up to like 80% of the original design.
Yeah.
Because I understand there's differences between, the code in Photoshop, but like, come on. Sometimes it's like these fonts are like in a different place and this picture's over here. So I kind of taught myself to do this like really sort of perfect front end, which, in the end is not even that smart, because you can spend a lot of time perfecting a design. And once you go past a certain amount of time invested, you're kind of being counterproductive. But before I kind of learned this lesson, I got really good at, you can barely tell the difference between the Photoshop file and the HTML.
Ah, man. I don't get me started, first of all, on that. Totally agree with you. And it's been a pain point in my career. I can code on the front end as well. But just the way that sometimes the certain roles are assigned and the way the process works, it's just not always possible to do that. And like you said too, you can get caught up as well, getting a little too pixel perfect when all you really need is an MVP. And then iterate later. So definitely agree with you, man. I think that's great that you have those skills. On the other side, on the flip side, what's your design kryptonite?
Design kryptonite. That's a good question.
Passing your work to developers?
Yeah. I'm going to say logos. I am like terrible at logos. I can't illustrate. Like a really good logo designer will like be able to sort of whip up some awesome little icon or like shape the words into some cool, metaphor for the name of the company. I'm all about just like word marks, like, the logo for my website is just words. Maybe one word will be bold and the other word will be not bold. But like, looking at your User Defenders podcast logo, like I could never in a million years even attempt anything close to how awesome this looks.
Well, you know what? I think you can. I think design is a muscle. I think as long as you have some sort of, visual aesthetic that you know what looks good, I think you can exercise that muscle. And I got some encouragement from our first guest, Daniel Hooper, who is just one of those kind of unicorns that's master of both.
Oh, yeah.
So he's like, anyone can develop these strengths. It's just a matter of really digging in. And that's the thing. Do you have time to do that? That's the other question. So I appreciate your transparency.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Totally.
It's absolutely true. And I think just lastly, I was going to mention logos, just on that kind of putting time into practicing it. I think I sort of shied away from logos my whole career because it's like the one thing that clients are extremely, extremely picky about.
True. So
there might have been like, I might have started into logos like many, many years ago. And after going through like a ton of iterations, being like, okay, I'm going to avoid these unconsciously for the rest of my life.
Right. So can you tell us, this is the area we talk about failure, and failure is no fun to really talk about or to think about even, but it is what shapes us into who we are and what defines us in many ways. And honestly, if we're not failing enough, we're not trying enough. That's how I see it. So could you tell us a story about what's been your biggest failure and just really take us to that place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pick one. I failed 1,000 times.
Amen.
I'd say the failure I learned from the most was, so I started getting really heavily into this entrepreneurial side of things and creating a product. And this was probably, I'd say, maybe 6 years ago now. And so I was watching my friend use Instagram, and this was like early in Instagram days, and he loves tattoos. He's covered in tattoos. And so he was like, "Oh, I'm getting a new tattoo. I got to show it to you." It's like I found it on some guy's Instagram. And so I watched him search through Instagram and try to find this picture that he was looking for inspiration that he looked at a few days ago, and he just couldn't find it. And I said, like, what's going on here? Like, isn't there a way that you can save pictures or like, go look back to see what you've commented on? And he's like, no. Like, I can't. I just have to search the hashtag and like look back through. And so, immediately I'm like, oh, maybe there's an opportunity here, right? So I run home and fire up Photoshop and come up with this idea for this web app that's basically it pulls in pictures based on hashtags. So what I called this was Tatstagram. Okay.
Nice.
And so this site pulled in every single picture that was posted on Instagram that was tagged with like tattoo or tats or inked or anything like that. And it kind of laid them out. It laid them all out in this sort of grid pattern. And you could sign up, like log in with your Instagram account, and then you could sort of like these photos and comment on them and share them and, kind of save them in your little inspiration folder.
Nice.
And then you could sort of sort them, like top rated or most liked today, kind of like a Reddit, sort of Reddit for pictures.
Yeah.
And I had this plan like, once one of these is successful, I can just make like, I was going to make one for cupcakes as well, because the cupcakes were like huge, baking, that kind of stuff.
$3 cupcakes.
So, yeah, exactly. So I spent like, I'd say like $5,000. I hired a developer off of Odesk, and I did the front end. I coded it all. I worked with this developer, and like I was that guy that was like, oh, this isn't pixel perfect. You have to change the button. It needs to be 10 pixels wider. And I spent months working with this developer being like, this isn't perfect. Like this needs to be perfect. I need to launch this. It all needs to look like super perfect, all without even, considering if anyone wanted to use this thing. And then, so finally, like $5,000 is 6 months later, I'm like, yes, I'm ready to go. And I launch this thing, and I like really turn on the promotional power. So I'm like, I create its own Instagram, and I'm like tagging people and like re-uploading their pictures and telling them to check out the site. And I do this like hard for probably 2 or 3 months. And I get a total of like 6 users.
Oh, ouch.
And I'm like, oh man, like I don't understand. I had this huge goal in my head. Like I guess in my head when I was building it, it was already successful.
Sure.
Right? Because I was envisioning exactly what was going to happen. And that was just like such a huge mistake and such a big lesson to learn is, don't look beyond where you are at this very moment. Don't live in your fantasy of what's going to happen when you launch this thing. So yeah, when I finally decided to call it quits, I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like what happened? And then, recovering from that, I started reading more about validation and this idea of making sure and like MVPs and all this stuff. And then I was kind of like, whoa, I was totally wrong.
Oh man.
But that's definitely the failure I learned the most from.
I appreciate you sharing that. And what do you want our listeners to take away from that story?
Don't launch anything ever. What I mean by that is
elaborate.
Like, don't ever be building something and like planning for this big launch, because it doesn't make any sense. You should be building something with people that want it already. So I have this sort of theory. It's not mine. I've read it 100 times before, but it's like, don't launch. Like, don't launch anything. Just slowly build and iterate and sort of work with people, do all the user research you need to do until you've built a product up that people want to use. And it's just going to slowly build. It's just going to slowly grow itself. There is no like, kick the doors open, launch party, 10,000 people all sign up at once and then dive into a pit of money. That just doesn't happen that way.
Right.
So, I would almost go as far as saying if you're this is all very like entrepreneurship, not very UX based.
That's okay. I see both go hand in hand in many ways.
Yeah. So I think that, what I am starting to write about now and tell more people is don't think of your own ideas. Look for an opportunity in a market that really, really needs something and give it to them. Because then you're so much less risk of failure and no one showing up because you've already identified that a whole group of people really need it.
Defenders, Craig said something that pretty much epitomizes the reason this show exists. Fighting for the user. Build something you know people want. Man.
Yes.
Do you have a story of something really crazy or super awkward that happened during user testing?
Yes.
Good. I'm sure I had a feeling you might, and I'm sure there's some comedy behind it. I would hope so.
It's not like it's not super awkward between like me and the users, but
okay.
And like so I don't like approaching people like in public. I'm not sure a lot of people do, but like I have this especially hard thing when I just avoid it entirely, like going up to someone saying like, "Oh, hey, excuse me, like, can I ask you a couple questions?" Or like, hey, can you give me directions? I hate the feeling of like putting people out or like causing them an inconvenience. So one of the kind of the first startups I ever started working for, I was kind of pushing the need for user testing. We hadn't done a lot of user testing, and I was like, look, we have to get this product in front of people. Again, we were building for months and months and months without letting anyone touch this thing, without running any kind of testing on any prototypes or anything. So I said, I was the guy being like, we have to do this. Like, I'm going to like arrange some user testing. And so finally the CEO says, okay, great. We've got a plan for you. You're going to go to Starbucks and you're going to do some like guerrilla testing. You're just going to approach people and get them to test the product and buy them a coffee. Wow. And I was like, oh God, worst nightmare ever for me. Right. And like, what have I done? I can't be like, no, that's a terrible, like, I've been the one saying, and so they're like, okay, so like tomorrow just head to the Starbucks near your house and do this. And I was like, oh my God. Okay. And so the next day I went to Starbucks and I was like, okay, let's start approaching people. And I just couldn't do it. I approached like one person. They were like, no, like get out of here. Like I'm busy. I'm grabbing a coffee and leaving. And I was like, I can't sit here all day and do this. So I didn't do it. And I just told them that I did.
Oh man.
And I was like, they're like, how'd it go? And I was like, oh yeah, great. Yeah. Lots of useful information from that. And they're like, okay, great. And then like, they didn't ask to see it, and so it's very like, don't do this, very wrong to do. But I just had to avoid it at all costs. Oh, so man. Not awkward between me and a user, but more so just me being a weird, awkward guy who can't approach people.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that, your vulnerability there. And I'll tell you, brother, I'm the same way. I am just sort of forcing myself within the past year or so to really jump out of my skin, to really get out of my comfort zone. I would never have been doing this show right now. That's not something, I am not a social person. So I totally identify with you there. And so have you taken any steps to try to, get out of your comfort zone more?
Yeah, I'm much better now. And I can approach people now more. Like this was so many years ago.
Sure.
I guess I was a bit younger too. And I wasn't sort of as confident in, it wasn't my product. So maybe I wasn't as confident in the product. But now, much less trouble doing that.
Yeah, that's great.
For whatever reason, I don't know, maybe it's just with age or just confidence in, my skills or what I've built. But yeah, I'm much better at it now.
Yeah. And it's, it's one of those things where it's, really, a lot of the magic happens outside the comfort zone. A hat tip to John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire, who's been a big inspiration on the reason I wanted to do this show too. But, he says the magic happens outside the comfort zone. And speaking of books, there's a great book called Rejection Proof. And this guy, his name is Zhang, I think. And he decided that because he also had the same struggles with that, he decided to conduct an experiment, and for 100 days he went and asked random strangers the weirdest things just to get a no. his goal was to get enough knows where he just, would bust his fears. And that's kind of his website is Fear Busters. So anyway, one thing he did was he went to somebody's house and knocked on the door and asked if he could play soccer in the backyard. And, and the guy actually said yes. So, eventually awesome. You'll get a yes. I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make. Eventually you will get a yes. It's just the tenacity and the consistency that we talked about earlier. So thanks for sharing that, Craig.
Yeah, that's a big thing I see in a lot of these sort of entrepreneurship training things. I checked out Noah Kagan's course, which is I can't remember the name of it. It's a make $1,000 per month. Or something like that. Make monthly 1K or something like that. Anyway, I went through that just to check it out. And, part of the lessons in there is teaching people how to ask for things in a really awkward setting. So one of the steps is go to your local coffee shop and order a coffee and just ask for it to be free. And just be like, can I have this for free? Yeah. And they'll be like, why? And then just be like, oh, I just need it for free. And then it's kind of this step about getting over your fear of asking for things. Yes. But the people in the comments are like, yeah, this works. 90% of the time, 90% of the people are like, yeah, I just got it for free just by asking.
Yep. This American Life had an episode where they were talking about similar things. And it was one of the guys would go to any place, even a department store. I say, hey, can I get the good guy deal? And he was surprised at how often it worked. Where yeah, sure, I'll give you 10% off or 15% off. So try that, guys. Try that. Anyway,
good guy deal.
Yeah, the good guy deal. Okay, getting back on track to the. I love that transition though. That was fun. One of my favorite lines from Tron was when he said, "I fight for the users." How do you fight for your users, Craig?
It's a good question. Fighting for your users, I would say. In my sort of day-to-day and sort of my mindset, I don't really fight for the users in the traditional sense that I'm trying to protect them from the evil stakeholders. Although it is kind villains. Of a good sort of the villains are
just
the
kidding. We love you, stakeholders.
Yeah. So I guess the way that I would fight for users is doing my best to communicate, to stakeholders and to founders and to sort of CEOs, the importance of building a usable and user-friendly product in that it's going to benefit them.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I feel like I'm approached by people to help them with their UX. And I say, why do you want help with your UX? And they say, oh, so that it has better UX, it's a checklist on the list of things to do, right? And so what I try to communicate is having good UX and having a really user-friendly product. It's going to mean that your product is more successful. It's going to grow faster. It's going to, it'll cost you less in support costs. It'll, you'll be able to focus more on building the business rather than putting out fires kind of thing. So the way that I equate that to fighting for the users is that by communicating good UX to the stakeholders and by allowing them to sort of put it in place, it means the product can continue to exist for those users to get value from. Do you kind of know what I mean?
I do. So I realized something. I skipped a question that is one of my favorite questions that I wanted to ask you. And this is it here. It's, what would your UX design superhero name be?
Oh man, UX design superhero, man. Ah, man. Let's go with Validation Man.
Oh, nice. I like that. That's good.
I find the concept of validation, just from an overall UX perspective, it's the most important part, whether you're building a new product or whether you're just should we put this feature into place, or whether it's just, does this checkout process need work, rather than just listening to a stakeholder who says like, I was looking at the checkout procedure and I think it needs some work. I think just off the top of my head, it looks like it needs some work. It's like, no, you need to validate like everything. Everything has to have a reason to be fixed or changed or worked on, and you have to have a goal in the end. So validation man would be the guy who comes down and says like, did you just say you were going to include a new feature, without there being a demand for it? And then I just like punch everybody out and fly away.
Love it. Thanks for embellishing me on that too. That's great. Validation man. That's wonderful. I have a friend, his name's Cesar Limas, and he's a storyboard artist. And what I do is I have him create art for each guest. So it's fun, a lot of fun. So you're validation man. And I can't wait to see what he comes up with for that. His handle on Twitter is Firehead. It's Pyred, Firehead. I think. Yeah, Pyred or HED. One of those. Anyway, great artist, great friend. So how do you mentioned about validating, your ideas, which is absolutely required to be successful. But how do you measure that success after you do get your idea validated and you get an MVP out there? How do you measure the success of that?
It's a good question. I think it's dependent on the product that you build. You could measure success in revenue, or you could measure success in signups, or I think monthly active users, like in terms of a digital product. I think that the big thing is kind of how often are people coming back and how often are they using it. So monthly active users is a big thing for me. Anybody could do a bunch of marketing and get a whole bunch of people to come to a landing page and sign up for something. But if you're not successful in sort of delivering the value that you're promising through the landing page, then you're just going to have a whole bunch of people that signed up and left and never came back.
That's awesome.
So I think getting people to continue to use your product and continue to be able to get value from it is a sign of success.
Excellent. And would you say that analytics helps a lot to determine those things?
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice. Like I said, like the metric of monthly active users is the one that I would look at.
Perfect. This question is kind of a toughie, but I think it's really important. I think a lot of our listeners will really appreciate what you have to say to this one. It's, what does the future of UX look like to you?
I think this is kind of something that I've thought about before.
Nice.
I think the future of UX kind of will see the, what's the word? I want to say like doing away with the title of UX designer.
Huh.
Because I think that UX is new enough that, and it's kind of coming into the mainstream now. I think that the job postings for UX designer must have gone up like 5 million% in the last 2 years.
Oh yes.
Especially with like the startup boom and everything. But I think that not a lot of people are really clear as to what it is, including people who are UX professionals. So, I mean, you kind of mentioned that article I wrote, why you shouldn't hire a UX UI designer.
Yes.
I mean, I published that, and like explosion of comments, mostly from UX professionals, like half of them being like, right on the money, man. And the other half being like, shut up. I'm going to come to your house and like break your face kind of thing, like very passionate about this thing that I wrote. And, the article was about, most of the roles that I see being advertised are people that want a guy to come in and design their, user interface, but then also consider UX. And like, what is consider UX, right? It's such a gigantic term. So what I think you'll see happen is maybe focusing more on each individual role within, that kind of makes up this UX designer. So there's like all the different parts that make that up. Like there's user research, there's IA, there's UI, there's all of these different professionals that have always existed. But then now there's like UX designer, which doesn't really have a definitive set of responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's a problem. I do think that hiring someone to be a UX designer without really knowing what you want them to do, it doesn't really make any sense. And so I think that as we come to see more value in UX, you're going to see people focus in more on, okay, well, what I really need is a user researcher. Like what I really need is someone to research and find out all the information I need to know about my target customer.
Yes.
As opposed to like I need a guy to build wireframes. That's half the thing. I need to use an UX designer to build me some wireframes. It's like, well, what are these wireframes based on? Like, what's influencing these? Like, what,
Right. Wireframes.
So maybe just like,
wireframes.
So, so definitely just like a more clear cut classification as to what UX designer is going to involve, and probably maybe not hiring this kind of overall UX designer role.
Very very provocative, my friend. And I appreciate that. I do. And I just want to say, candidly, I think my comment on there is one of the top pushed comments.
Yes, I saw that.
And I want to, I hope my comment didn't come across, in any sort of combative way, and please forgive me if it did. I really was not trying to be combative, or like I'm going to come to your house and throw eggs at it. But I do still feel like, even though I think what your intent and your perception, behind that, I believe that you have a lot of really good points, especially as it relates to specialization. Because even though the whole buzzword, it seems like that, we need generalists. We don't need specialists. We need generalists. Well, the trade-off is you're going to have somebody who does a lot of things, but not one thing really well. So I want to ask you, right. And I still hold to my conviction of companies not being there yet to where they either have the belief or budget or both to be able to actually accomplish that. How do you think companies can get behind your vision, which again, I think you have a very good argument, can get behind that vision and actually move forward in that?
I think it's about sort of goal, like setting your goals. So, and I totally agree that especially startups, they don't have the budget to hire like 5 different people to be a giant UX department. Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm not saying you need to hire each person individually to specialize on that one thing. I mean, definitely from a larger organization, that is, if you have the budget, then that's going to, help the success of whatever you're working on, like, so much. But I think that maybe what I'm trying to hit on is, don't hire someone to be your UX guy and then say like, okay, do UX. Can you UX this stuff up so that it works better?
Make me a sexy product.
Yeah, like don't come in. Yeah, don't come in one day and say to your UX guy like, I need some wireframes, and then the next day be like, oh shit, we need to do some user testing, and then in the same day it's like, oh, also, can you sort all of the content that we're planning on producing and organize it all. Like, it just seems like it's smarter to be able to allow a UX professional to focus on what they're doing rather than hire them to do a million things all at once.
Gotcha.
Like, this opinion could be biased on my experiences.
That's okay.
Because I have had a lot of experiences like that. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it kind of take away from the forward momentum of building a product. Which is, 1 minute you've got the person doing this, and the next minute you've got the person doing that. And they're taking little tiny baby steps, on each front instead of actually accomplishing something.
Right.
I don't know if that helps clear up what I'm saying, but.
No, it does. And I do appreciate you speaking to that. It's definitely an interesting point of view. And you know what? Things change so much in this industry, which is another reason why I wanted to do this show. Who knows? Maybe that is a movement we will start to see more of, especially as we see so many incredible products being built and launched into the market that are really helping change people's lives and the way they do things. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. You know what? I didn't even realize that you were the top comment. Now I'm looking at it and I'm laughing to
That's
myself.
me. You ain't mad at me though, right?
I remember when you wrote me, I was like, I know this guy. Like when you were like, "Hey, I love you being on the podcast," I was like, "How do I know this guy?" Like I recognize his name. Now I know.
That's me.
I have your picture on a dartboard in my office, and I throw darts at everything.
Love it. Oh, that's great.
No, I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah. And that's what I love about this community is, there's so much generosity, and you are one of those guys that's really out there. You're one of the good guys, that's out there generously giving your knowledge and, helping others. And that blog, you guys, listen to me. You got to read that post that Craig wrote. It's how to get a job in UX design without any experience. Really, really great write-up. So check that out, and we'll
that's at the user testing blog.
That's on the user testing blog. Yes. So usertesting.com, and then just type in Craig Morrison, I think, into the search box.
Yeah.
So as we start wrapping up here, I apologize for going a little over, but we'll start wrapping. It's been great.
Oh, no
great
worries.
Conversation. Great. Awesome. Let's wrap up with superpowers. I like to leave our defenders with some great, resources they can look into after they listen to this. What's your most invincible UX resource or tool you can recommend to our listeners?
I do, and sounds like I'm plugging now.
That's
I
all right.
do really like usertesting.com. Because user testing it's a big time commitment, especially to sort of organize with people, find them, get them to come in, or organize doing it, over a computer, which is just an even bigger nightmare. I've found that using usertesting.com to sort of quickly get some feedback on things you're looking for. So it's not going to work if you have a base of users that you want to test on. You can't just say like, hey, go to usertesting.com and sign up. But it does work. I worked on a product a while back that was, it was kind of like a Kickstarter for advertising. So we were trying to get people to, so let's say that you were, I don't know, some kind of charity organization like Stop Whaling or something. And you don't have a huge like marketing budget, but you produce like a little video and you want people to see it so that you can raise awareness. We were asking people to donate money towards the marketing budget for that video. So if you gave $50, then we would take that $50 and we would pay for that to run at the start of YouTube ads or YouTube videos. So if you searched up a video about, SeaWorld, you might see a video that was like, stop whale hunting or stop keeping whales in captivity. And that was paid for by people who donated the money. Anyway, to bring it back to user testing, this didn't really have like a set group of users. It was kind of just, anyone who could get to come to the page to donate. So we did a ton of testing on usertesting.com, and it gave us so much insight onto if people were able to understand the concept and what we needed to communicate better. And this is stuff that, would have taken hours and weeks to kind of recruit people from wherever, Craigslists or friends, or pay them to come down to our office, and do all that kind of stuff. It just really saved a ton of time. So that's kind of my like big resource, usertesting.com. And they actually have a thing called Peak. I think it's like peak.usertesting.com. And this is like free. It's like a free 5-minute test. So, if you put together a landing page or like a product interface and you're like, I wonder what people think, you can kind of throw it up there and they'll send you an email with a live person using it for 5 minutes.
That is awesome.
So it's super cool.
Love user testing. Love usertesting.com.
Yeah.
Great resource. If you could recommend one book to our listeners, what would it be and why?
The Lean Startup, as I mentioned before.
Nice.
It just kind of why is because it just kind of, it really helped me re-envision like how the process of building something can work, like iterating and really just building a minimum viable product. And like, it kind of reinforces a lot of UX stuff, but it brings it into more of a product development and like an overall sort of start to finish kind of concept. And this just really helped shape, it helped shape, beyond just building products, but that and kind of going into like the 80-20 rule, which is, you don't need to put in 1,000 hours to get the value that you want out of it. So definitely the lean startup. Everyone that I work with, every sort of company that I start to work with, I ask them like, have you read this? And if they haven't, I say like, it's almost a requirement if I'm going to work with you. Awesome.
Great. Yeah, I need to read that one. I'm reading Lean UX, but I know that was inspired from Lean Startup book by Eric Ries, I believe.
Yeah, it's like Eric Ries. Yeah, he kind of created this whole Lean movement, and it's based on the. I don't know if you know that story, but it's based on the manufacturing plant of I think it's Honda.
Oh, the Toyota maybe.
Toyota.
Yes.
Toyota. Yeah. So he kind of took that lean sort of manufacturing process and applied it to building a product.
Sweet. Okay, so what's your best advice for aspiring UX design superheroes?
Don't let me think, how do I word this? Don't get lost in getting angry about people not understanding UX. So I think that, a lot of new UX professionals I see, they're very passionate, which is amazing. Like the community is so passionate.
Yes.
But sometimes I see people like getting like angry or frustrated or like, how could they do this? Like, how could they build this? Like, this is so stupid, like, and then kind of like going in and like looking at stakeholders like they're evil people, like who are trying to just like zap users of their life force kind of thing. Like, I think what you should keep in mind is being able to communicate the benefits of UX to stakeholders in a language they can understand. So instead of just saying like, well, you have to build a product that users can use so that the users can use it, communicate to them things like, if you invest in UX, it means like a ton of stuff, less support costs, less time putting out fires. You're having your developers working on, building things to expand your product instead of going back and fixing things. And like, this is stuff that stakeholders can understand, as opposed to just saying, you need to have a product that's usable, like the end. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. You know what, Craig? I've been doing this for 15 years and I'm taking away from that. So thank you. Pro tip, be kind.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And great community. Yep. Well, as we close, Craig, why don't you tell our audience the best way to connect and keep up with you?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at CraigMCF5. And we talked about my blog. So my blog is usabilityhour.com. So if you go there, you'll see a bunch of resources and some articles I've been writing. And also, we kind of mentioned earlier, getquelia.com, which is the product I just launched that helps you sort of grow your brand's social presence, mainly on Twitter. And actually, if you just feel like shooting me an email and yelling at me and telling me that all my opinions are wrong,
or tell you how awesome your comedy is.
Yeah.
Right?
You can send me an email, at craig@usabilityhour.com. And I like to read all my emails and reply to people, and it's great to hear from anyone.
Wonderful, Craig. And folks, I'm going to put this stuff in the show notes. So I'll put all these links in there and everything as well, for easy access. Craig, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I thank you for your time and all the great value you added to this show. Fight on, my friend. Great interview with Craig Morrison. Hope you found great value in that conversation, as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, would you take a minute and leave a rating and review on iTunes? Greatly appreciated. It really helps keep the show in new and noteworthy, and helps others discover it as well. Also, love to connect with you. I'm on Twitter at UserDefenders. Website is at userdefenders.com. Thanks so much for listening, and until next week, fight on, my friends.